Hey everyone, and welcome to this deep dive.
Yeah.
Today we're going to be tackling master your emotions.
Oh, this is a good one.
Yeah, it really is. And it's funny because so many of us, I think, feel like we're kind of at the mercy of our emotions. Like there are these things that just kind of happen to us.
Right.
But this book is all about understanding them, maybe even like taming them a little bit.
Yeah, it's really about taking control
Exactly.
instead of letting them control you.
And one of the things I found really interesting was how it starts off by talking about our brains basically being wired for survival.
Right? Like that's the foundation.
Yeah.
And it makes sense,
Okay.
back in the day for our ancestors, it was all about avoiding danger.
Right. Avoiding those saber-toothed tiger.
Exactly. But the thing is, our brains haven't quite caught up to modern times.
So we're still reacting like we're going to get attacked by a wild animal.
Pretty much. And that's where this negativity bias comes in.
Oh, yeah. Tell me about that. That was a new one for me.
Yeah, it's basically this tendency for our brains to focus more on the negative than the positive.
So, like, one bad comment
Yeah.
can completely overshadow 100 good ones.
Exactly. It's like that one bad review on Amazon that just ruins your whole day.
Oh, my gosh. Yes. That's totally me. It's like my brain just, like, grabs onto that negative stuff and won't let go.
Right. And the book explains that it's because for our ancestors, those negative experiences.
You're the ones that could really hurt them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it was like the survival mechanism.
Okay, that makes sense.
But the problem is now we're applying that same logic to things that aren't actually life or death situations.
Like that email from your boss.
Or that snarky comment on social media.
So basically, we're letting our ancient brains dictate how we feel about modern problems.
Pretty much. And it's not doing us any favors.
No, it's not. So then the book goes on to talk about this thing called the dopamine trap.
Oh, yes. This is a fascinating one.
And this is all about how our brains get hooked on certain things.
Right. Things that give us that quick hit of pleasure.
Dopamine.
Right. Exactly. It's like our brain's reward system.
But the trap part is that we end up chasing those quick fixes instead of what actually makes us happy.
Right. We get so caught up in that instant gratification that we lose sight of the bigger picture.
And the book actually talks about how this dopamine system, which was once essential for survival, is now being kind of hijacked.
Yeah, think about all the things in our modern world that are designed to trigger those dopamine releases.
Like what, social media?
Oh, absolutely. Social media is a big
All
one.
those notifications?
The likes, the comments, the endless scrolling.
Oh, yeah. And then there's like junk food.
Definitely. Our brains are wired to crave sugary, fatty foods.
Because they used to be scarce.
Right, back in the day, finding a big, juicy piece of fruit was like winning the lottery.
But now we have access to that stuff 24/7.
And our poor brains don't know how to handle it.
That's like we're overloading the system.
Exactly. And the book highlights some really interesting research on this. Like, did you know that studies have shown that winning the lottery actually has the same long-term impact on happiness levels as becoming paraplegic?
Wait, really?
Yeah, it's wild, right?
That's crazy.
It seems counterintuitive, but basically what it shows is that our brains are incredibly adaptable.
So we adjust to both the good and the bad.
Exactly. And we end up back at our baseline level of happiness.
Wow. So basically, chasing those dopamine highs isn't actually the key to lasting happiness.
Not really. It's more about finding contentment and peace within ourselves.
Okay, so how do we do that?
Right.
Where do we even begin?
Well, the book talks about a few different concepts, and one of the big ones is understanding the role of the ego.
The ego.
Yeah, and I know when we hear that word, we often think of arrogance or being self-centered.
Yeah, for sure.
But in this context, it's more about that constructed sense of self.
You mean like that voice in our head that's always judging and comparing?
Exactly. That inner critic is definitely part of the ego. And the book explains that the ego loves to cling to external things for validation.
So like our possessions, our achievements, even our relationships.
Right. It's like we build our identity around these things.
And then we become dependent on them for our sense of worth.
Exactly. And that's where the suffering comes in. Because we're constantly seeking approval and validation from outside sources.
Instead of finding it within ourselves.
Right. And it's a never-ending cycle.
Yeah.
Because there will always be more to achieve more, to acquire more, to prove.
It's exhausting just thinking about it.
It is. And it's not a sustainable path to happiness.
So this is all starting to make sense now, like the negativity bias, the dopamine trap, the ego, it's all connected.
Yeah, it's all part of this complex web of how our brains work.
And how we get in our own way.
Exactly. But the good news is that once we understand these patterns, we can start to break free from them.
And that's where the real work begins.
It is, but it's also where the magic happens.
So stay tuned, because in our next part, we'll dive into some of the specific tools and techniques that the book offers for actually mastering our emotions.
I'm excited to get into that.
Me too.
Okay, so we've talked about how, like, our brains are kind of working against us.
Right, with that negativity bias and all those dopamine traps.
Yeah, exactly. And how our ego can get in the way of true happiness.
Totally. But now I'm curious, like, where do we go from here?
Well, the book actually gives us some really practical tools and techniques.
Okay, good. Because I was starting to feel a little hopeless.
Oh, no, not at all. There's so much we can do. And one of the most surprising things I learned was how much our physical state affects our emotional well-being.
Really? So it's not just about, like, positive thinking.
It's definitely not just about that. There's a real mind-body connection.
Interesting. So what kind of things are we talking about?
Well, for example, the book talks a lot about sleep.
Oh, sleep. I know, I don't get enough of that.
I think most of us don't.
But how does that tie into our emotions?
Well, when we're sleep deprived, our emotions are all over the place.
Yeah, that's true. I'm definitely more irritable when I'm tired.
Right. And we're less able to cope with stress.
So basically, getting enough sleep is like the foundation for emotional well-being.
Exactly. It's like building a house on solid ground.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
What else is there?
Well, the book also talks about posture.
Posture.
Yeah. It sounds kind of weird, but apparently how we hold our bodies can actually influence how we feel.
Really? So like standing up straight can make you feel more confident?
Exactly. There's research that shows that power posing can actually boost your testosterone levels.
Wow. I'm gonna have to try that.
You should. And then there's exercise, which we all know is good for us physically.
But it helps with emotions too.
Absolutely. Exercise releases endorphins, which have mood-boosting effects.
Oh yeah. I always feel better after a workout.
Right. And it can help reduce stress and anxiety.
But sometimes it's so hard to get motivated.
I know, I struggle with that too. But the book suggests finding activities you actually enjoy.
So it doesn't have to be like running on a treadmill.
Not at all. It could be dancing, swimming, hiking, anything that gets you moving.
That's good to know.
And then, of course, there's the mental side of things.
Like our thoughts.
Exactly. Our thoughts have a huge impact on our emotions.
And I know we talked about negativity bias.
Right, but the good news is that we can actually train our brains to be more positive.
So how do we do that?
Well, one of the most powerful techniques is gratitude.
Gratitude. I've heard about that.
Yeah, it's basically about focusing on the good things in our lives.
Even when things are tough.
Exactly. Because even in the darkest of times, there's always something to be grateful for.
Okay, but sometimes it feels a little forced.
I know what you mean. But it's like a muscle, you have to exercise it.
So the more you practice gratitude, the easier it becomes.
Exactly. And the book suggests some simple ways to do that, like keeping a gratitude journal.
Oh yeah, where you write
Oh.
down things you're thankful for.
Right, or just taking a moment each day to appreciate the little things.
Like a warm cup of coffee.
Exactly. Or a beautiful sunset, or even
Hmm.
just the fact that you're alive.
I like that.
And then for those really big, overwhelming emotions.
The ones that just kind of knock you off your feet.
Yeah, the book introduces this technique called the Sedona method.
The Sedona method.
Yeah, it's all about consciously releasing those feelings that aren't serving us.
So not like bottling them up.
No, not at all. It's more about acknowledging them and then choosing to let them go.
Okay, that sounds interesting. How does it work?
Well, basically, you ask yourself a series of questions about the emotion you're feeling.
Like what?
Could I let this feeling go? Would I let this feeling go? When...
So it's about giving yourself permission to release the emotion.
Exactly. And it's based on the idea that we're not our emotions. They're just temporary states.
That's a good reminder.
It is, and it's a very empowering technique because
Oh.
it gives you back control.
So instead of being ruled by our emotions,
We can choose how we respond to them.
I like that. So we've talked about sleep, posture, exercise, gratitude, the Sedona method. Is there anything else?
Well, there is one more piece of the puzzle.
Well, lay it on me.
The book actually talks about how even so-called negative emotions can be valuable guides.
Wait, really?
Yeah, it sounds counterintuitive, but hear me out.
Okay, I'm listening. Negative emotions as guides. I'm not sure I'm following.
I know it sounds strange, right?
Yeah.
But the book basically says that these emotions, they're not inherently bad.
Okay.
They're actually trying to tell us something.
So like what kind of things are we talking about here?
Well, let's start with fear.
Fear. Okay.
We usually see fear as a stop sign, right?
Yeah, like danger, stay away.
Exactly. But what if instead of running away from fear, we actually leaned into it?
Leaned into fear. That sounds terrifying.
I know it's counterintuitive, but the book suggests that fear is often a sign that we're on the verge of growth.
So like when we step outside our comfort zone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Think about it anytime you've done something that really pushed your limits.
Yeah, I guess there's usually some fear involved,
Right, because you're facing the unknown.
but that's also where the excitement is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So fear can actually be a motivator.
Okay, I'm starting to see it. But what about other emotions like resentment?
Ah, resentment. That's a tough one.
Yeah, it's hard to see how holding on to anger towards someone could be a good thing.
Right. But the book suggests that resentment is often about an inability to forgive.
Forgive ourselves or others.
Both, actually.
So it's like we're holding on to the past.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
we're letting it poison the present.
And the book says that forgiveness is the key to breaking free.
It is. But it's not easy.
No, it's definitely not.
It takes a lot of courage and compassion.
But the rewards are worth it.
They are, because holding on to resentment is only hurting us.
It's like carrying around a heavy weight.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And when we finally let it go, we feel so much lighter.
And then there's jealousy.
Oh, jealousy, another fun one.
Yeah, I usually try to just ignore those feelings.
I think most of us do. But the book has a really interesting perspective on jealousy.
Okay, I'm curious.
It suggests that jealousy can actually be a compass.
A compass.
Yeah. Well, think about it. When you're jealous of someone, what is it that you're really envious of?
I guess it's usually something that I want for myself.
Exactly. So jealousy can actually point us towards our desires.
So instead of feeling bad about being jealous, we can use it as information.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It can help us identify our goals and aspirations.
That's a really cool way to look at it.
It is. And it's all about shifting our perspective.
From negative to positive.
Exactly. And the key to all of this is self-awareness.
Self-awareness.
Yeah, it's about paying attention to our thoughts, our feelings, our behaviors without judgment.
So just observing ourselves.
Exactly. And the more aware we become, the more choices we have.
So we're not just reacting to our emotions.
Right. We're responding to them consciously and intentionally.
This has been an incredible deep dive.
It really has.
I feel like I've learned so much about how to understand and manage my emotions.
Me too. And I think the biggest takeaway for me is that we have more power than we think.
We're not at the mercy of our feeling.
Exactly. We can choose how we want to feel.
And that's a really empowering message.
It is. So remember, even small changes can make a big difference.
Like practicing gratitude.
Yeah, or taking a few deep breaths when you're feeling overwhelmed.
And don't be afraid to ask for help.
Absolutely. There are so many resources available.
This is a journey, not a destination.
So be patient with yourself and celebrate your progress.
And most importantly, remember to enjoy the ride.
Absolutely.
Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive.
Thanks for joining us.
We'll see you next time.